Hello, I'm Paige Winfield Cunningham, a national healthcare reporter here at the Washington Post. Today we have two segments on cancer care. Later, we will be joined by Ron Alpha, co-founder and CEO of Noetic. But first, I'm pleased to be joined by Colin Murdoch, president of Isomorphic Labs. Colin, welcome.
Hey Paige, it's great to see you. It's great to be here.
I'm excited about this conversation. Colin, you recently announced that Isomorphic Labs is preparing for the first human trials of AI-designed cancer drugs. For our audience who may not be familiar with your work, can you explain how AI is actually designing new cancer treatments?
Well, we're super excited about the potential of AI to help solve all disease, in particular cancer, which is a focus area for us. And right now, Paige, we're focused actually on drug discovery. So that's the stage before the clinic. And fundamentally, we are making computers smarter so they can help our drug design teams help to tackle a whole range of different cancers. And Isomorphic Labs was actually formed from a Nobel Prize winning breakthrough 3 or 4 years ago that allows us to more fundamentally understand diseases like cancer and design drugs that can help cure or treat those cancers. And since then, we've built an incredible team of people, AI researchers, world-class AI researchers, along with incredible drug designers. And they work hand in hand in our offices, both in London, but interestingly now, we also have an office in Boston, in the US. I'm really excited about as we advance towards the clinic, as you said.
I want to talk about the speed of drug discovery here. And we know that traditional discovery takes a long time, 10 to 15 years, costs billions of dollars, high failure rate. And there's this urgency because we still see cancer mortality. More than 500,000 Americans die every year from cancer. So can AI accelerate this timeline of drug discovery? Can you talk about that?
We really think it can. We really think it can have a profound impact on the time and the money it takes to get a drug to the clinic through that discovery stage, which, as you said, takes an awful lot of time and money right now. And we want to get these drugs to patients as quickly as possible. We also think it can really improve the chances of success when we take a drug into the clinic, because maybe, as you said, you take a drug into the clinic and 9 out of 10, that's a terrible statistic, 9 out of 10 drugs fail when we take them into the clinic. So we're also super focused on designing better drugs. What we really hope to see and what we're beginning to see in our programs already is that we can reduce the time, we can reduce the cost, but importantly, we can begin to improve the probability of success of these programs as they advance toward the clinic. And it's all because the combination of our world-leading drug design engine based on AI combined with world-leading experts in drug design. These two things really work very closely together to achieve those outcomes. And so I'm really, really excited about the potential for how this can help cancer, a terrible disease.
I'd really like to drill down into how this works. I know your company grew out of Google DeepMind's AlphaFold breakthrough, and this is an AI system that can predict protein structures. I'm not a scientist. I imagine many of the people watching this show are not scientists. So can you walk us through why understanding protein structures is so crucial for fighting cancer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're absolutely right. The company was born, and I've actually now a Nobel Prize winning breakthrough 3 or 4 years ago out of Google DeepMind. This was a breakthrough we called AlphaFold. And as you said, AlphaFold helps us to understand proteins. So why is this relevant? Well, if we start at the scale of our bodies and then we step one step in, that's organs, and then we go in again, we get to cells. And within cells, the things that do the real work are proteins. And when proteins go wrong, that tends to lead to disease, and in this case, cancer. When you're trying to create a medicine or a drug to help with cancer, it's very important to understand the structure, the three-dimensional structure of the protein you're trying to interact with. It's a bit like a lock and a key mechanism. So what AlphaFold allowed us to do was to understand the structure of these proteins. Now, before AlphaFold, it used to take years of painstaking work and millions of dollars of equipment to determine the structure of a protein. With AlphaFold, we took that process from years to minutes, and in some cases even seconds, which is an incredible breakthrough, and that's why it won a Nobel Prize. That's at the core of what we do, Paige, but there are many different problems actually in drug discovery. So AlphaFold for us was just the beginning. So our drug design engine not only understands the structure of proteins, which are very important for the reasons I just described, but also when you're making a medicine, you want to understand not just the structure of the medicine and the structure of the protein, but how these two things come together and bind together. You want to understand whether when you take a pill, it's going to make it through your intestine to the place that it really needs to get to combat that cancer. So these are all really big, important AlphaFold scale problems that we're working on, and we're using AI to really, really speed and improve these things up with our very generalizable drug design platform. And maybe I could just say something about that generalizable point, because this is really important. There are many, many different diseases, many, many different cancers. And there's some incredible people that have been working on these diseases for many years, and I have a huge amount of respect for them. These are really hard problems. The way that you would typically conduct a drug design program would be to start at the beginning, understand the biology, and then design a new medicine and take it into the clinic. And then when you started in your next program, you could go back to the beginning and start again. You probably wouldn't get a lot of learning from that first attempt. What our drug design engine allows you to do is to take learnings from your first program, transfer them to the second one, and so on and so forth, so that you've always got a starting point ready to go, and it really speeds things up because you're able to use this core technology to get started really quickly. So exciting to be able to have that generalizable drug design engine, because I think that's going to allow us to more generally tackle the whole range of different cancers we see out there, rather than just having to pick one program off at a time.
Well, and you mentioned many different kinds of cancer, and scientists have discovered this. It's really different, hundreds of different diseases. Essentially, we're moving toward more personalized treatments. How does AI help you design therapies that can either target specific cancer types or find universal approaches that work across multiple cancers?
Well, the technology we have allows us to rapidly understand the proteins that are the source of any different cancer type very quickly. So you don't have to spend kind of years trying to understand the mechanism that underlies that cancer, because we're able to much more quickly and much more rapidly surface what's really going on. And then importantly, for each different cancer type, we're then able to also design a medicine using our technology with our amazing drug design team together to much more rapidly design a cancer treatment for that specific cancer. Not only that, we also hope to really reduce the side effects that cancer treatment can have, because we all know there are some amazing treatments out there, but they can have some really challenging side effects. We believe our technology is not only going to help with treating the cancer, but also dramatically reduce the side effects. Because now, if I can get a little bit technical now, we understand not just whether a medicine will interact with the protein that is causing the cancer. Because of the way we've designed the technology, we can also test that medicine against every other protein in the body, the entire proteome, as we call it, and many side effects as a result of the medicine not just interacting with the protein you want it to interact, but interacting with other proteins as well. So I think that holds great hope for creating really powerful medicines that also reduce the side effects.
We're talking a lot about hopeful things here, but I want to also address, the sobering reality of cancer, and we've seen deaths from certain types of cancer unfortunately go up in the last couple of years. And it seems like in this space, it could be really easy to overpromise results because people want hope, people want promises of cures. You mentioned that cancer patients may soon be living for decades with what we now see as incurable cancers, similar to HIV patients today. So what would you say to a cancer patient watching this interview? What can they realistically expect from AI-driven drug discovery in the next 5 years versus, say, the next 20 years?
Well, we've already made incredible progress, and we do this for the patients. We do this for you, if you're listening. This is what really motivates me and everyone on this team. We continue to invest in our core drug design engine, and we really believe that through that investment, we'll be able to design and advance medicines more quickly to get them to more patients like you. And I would expect in the next 5 years would have made dramatic improvement in the speed and probability of success that we can create when we're designing these new medicines. Of course, there is clinical trials, and we've got to make sure that we conduct those in the right way. So those take time. But I would expect to see dramatic improvements in our core understanding of the disease and the development of medicines over the next 5 years. And as we go forwards from there, what I really hope is that we're able to tackle more and more of these cancers in a way that means that you and other patients are able to get the medicines you really need.
And can you tell us about specifically what types of cancers you're targeting?
We are targeting a whole range of different cancers, actually. I can't get into the specifics of our individual programs, unfortunately, but we're targeting a whole range of different cancers. And that is because, again, our underlying technology is not specific to one particular disease or one particular cancer, but allows us to work across a range of different cancers. And actually, more than that, other diseases as well. For example, immunology is another area we're focused, which in some ways is quite closely allied to cancer.
Isomorphic Labs has partnerships with pharmaceutical giants, including Eli Lilly and Novartis. Very competitive industry here. How important is collaboration for solving cancer?
It's really important. I mean, I think we're going to have to pull together a whole group of different amazing companies to try and tackle a problem as big as cancer. And we're super thankful for our partnership with Eli Lilly and Novartis. They're incredible organizations. And we'll continue with partnering with pharma and other ecosystem players to make sure we can bring the full force of science to help solve this challenge. What we're really trying to contribute is our deep understanding of AI, our deep drug design expertise, and putting these two things together. We really hope to help the industry at large and work with our partners to dramatically accelerate and improve the chances of success as we design new medicines for cancer.
And are you sharing these AI discoveries that could help other researchers, or do intellectual property concerns limit this cooperation?
So we collaborate deeply with the researchers that we collaborate with, for example, with Eli Lilly and Novartis. We have other partners in contract research organizations. These are organizations that we work with to conduct wet lab experiments, which means that before we take things into the clinic, we work with them to test out our medicines in the wet lab with various different mechanisms and various different experiments. And we also work with some academic institutes as well, where we can do work that kind of makes sense to both of us. So yeah, we work very broadly and widely with a whole range of different institutions.
One of the broad concerns about AI in medicine is that this somehow replaces the doctor-patient relationship, or that, patients are feeling as though their doctors are kind of farming some of this stuff out to AI. How do you kind of look at all of that, and what role do you think oncologists will play in an AI-driven future?
So at Isomorphic, we're quite focused on the medicine design itself rather than the interface with the patient. So what we hope to do is create better medicines for physicians to prescribe to patients. My brother and sister are actually both doctors, and so I know that they very much appreciate that patient interaction, and I'm sure that will continue for a decent amount of time. But at Isomorphic Labs, we're very focused on creating the medicines for the physicians, and then the right interaction with the patient, I think, is something that others will be thinking about.
In this series, we've been looking at the power of prevention and early diagnosis. Is Isomorphic Labs looking beyond just developing new drugs, like preventing cancers from occurring or catching them earlier when they're more treatable?
Well, our first focus, if you like, is on creating drugs. But actually, part of doing that, you have to begin to deeply understand the underlying biology, the disease biology that causes those cancers. And as a result of that, once you've understood the biology, you can begin to understand what we call biomarkers and other signals that a cancer may be developing. So as an outcome, if you like, of our focus on designing drugs, we'll begin to understand more about disease biology. And it may be potential, not currently on our roadmap, it may be possible for us to then share those findings and possibly create diagnostics, as you say, to help identify patients earlier so they can get treatment earlier.
Colin, your company's mission is very ambitious, to use AI to solve all diseases. If you could look into a crystal ball 25 years from now, what would cancer care look like?
You're absolutely right. We have a very ambitious mission, and it's really something we're very proud of and we really want to work towards. Right now, we're focused on designing tools that can really help design drugs. So 25 years from now, I'd really love for us to be in a position where, pretty much for any form of cancer, there is a kind of a medicine that is going to help treat that and help ameliorate the symptoms. That would be a wonderful world to live in. I think we've all been touched by people that have got cancer, or we know someone that's got cancer. So that would be an amazing outcome.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but this has been a fascinating conversation. Colin Murdoch, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Please stick around. I'll be talking to Ron Alpha right after this.
How do we break through in cancer? It starts with an idea, a question no one's dared to ask before, an answer that challenges what we thought was possible. That's a breakthrough. In a room of experts, it's a standing ovation, a leap forward in how we understand and treat cancer.
We've developed new modalities to target these factors that maybe 5-10 years ago were thought to be completely undruggable.
In the hands of patients, it's more time.
Cancer breakthroughs mean longer time with family, better responses, less toxicity, a better life.
Breakthroughs don't happen overnight. They're built on decades of research, setbacks, and the grit to keep going.
For every new drug that is a breakthrough, there's probably 10 drugs that we tried and failed.
Resilience is what keeps us moving.
Every setback can be a win because it's just an understanding of what didn't work.
Smarter medicines, tougher targets, working to stay a step ahead of cancer.
There's so much innovation to address these really tough questions to develop better medicines.
We're not waiting for breakthroughs. We're working to create them.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ruth Umo, Executive Editor at Fortune. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Legos, Chief Oncology Officer at Pfizer. His team is using digital tools to rethink some of the most complex and promising areas of cancer care. Jeff, you spent more than 2 decades in healthcare, including at some of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies. What's your take on the promise of technology in healthcare with a focus on AI to improve patient outcomes?
Thank you, Ruth. And I'm incredibly honored and excited to be here with you today to kind of share my perspective. And firstly, I think digital technologies and AI aren't just supporting healthcare, but they're truly setting the pace of science. And they're doing so at a rate much faster than human judgment or traditional capacity alone. When I think about the promise of AI, it really has the potential to create unique insights from very large data sets that were traditionally conceived impossible. And when you think about the enormity of data that we're talking about, it's no longer about megabytes or gigabytes. It's really about petabytes or zettabytes of data, which, to put that into perspective, is about 1 million or 1 trillion gigabytes. So a very high volume amount of data. In terms of the promise, it has the potential to accelerate scientific breakthroughs, to optimize efficiencies in our processes, and really transform the experience for healthcare providers and patients. And when we think about now being an opportune time to employ or deploy these technologies, it's really critical. In particular, when you think about the time it takes to bring a new molecule to a medicine, on average, it's about 10 years, and the costs have actually quadrupled, while the overall success rates remain relatively low at less than 10%. And we think about areas that I'm particularly passionate about, like cancer care. It does provide opportunities to really identify patients much earlier in their diagnosis, so early detection and early intervention, which is a really nice opportunity to help identify patients much sooner before their disease gets more complex and metastasizes.
Certainly. Well, let's shift the lens to Pfizer specifically. One area you just mentioned that seems to touch everyone and where innovation, quite frankly, feels especially urgent is cancer. How are you guiding your team to think about how AI and digital tools can make the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think, despite the number of scientific advancements and new medicines that have been approved for cancer over the last decade, it still remains an incredibly high and major unmet medical need. There are millions of new diagnoses every year, and cancer remains the second leading cause of death in the US and throughout the entire world. When we think about it at Pfizer, for patients who are waiting for breakthroughs, every day actually matters. And when we look at our overall principle, time is life for these patients. And these days really, really count. In terms of some of the areas and the approaches that we are using, first is a digital technology and AI-driven culture, and that we are training all of our scientists and our physicians to become experts in AI or AI-enabled research and development. Secondly, it gives us the opportunity around documentation, data analysis, and information management to be able to look at the entire internal and external literature and landscape and process information and data in a much shorter fraction of time compared to things that traditionally may take months or even years to do. Lastly, we're deploying it into our clinical trials as an opportunity to look at the design, the efficiency, the effectiveness of our clinical trials, and in particular, collaborating with companies like Visioneer in order to enhance early decision-making by using radiographic information to better understand how a patient's disease is progressing or responding to therapy.
I mean, look, we've talked about how digital tools are shaping drug discovery and clinical trials, but what does this look like in the hands of patients, in the hands of physicians, and certainly in the hands of scientists?
No, absolutely. And maybe I'll start with a patient. Obviously, when a patient receives a diagnosis of cancer, it's incredibly scary and comes with a lot of uncertainty and anxiety. So one of the first generative AI tools that I'm quite proud of is a tool called Health Answers by Pfizer. This gives patients the ability to ask questions about their own individual diagnosis and receive answers and responses in real time. So it's a pretty powerful tool. The second area is how this is actually equipping and informing our scientists. Here at Pfizer, we actually are leveraging a tool called OncoScout, which actually gives the scientists the ability to canvas all of the external literature and all of our internal experiments that have been done to create new insights and new hypotheses from very large volumes of data, what we like to refer to as frictionless science. The last area that I particularly would like to highlight is what does it look like in the hands of physicians? They are treating their patients with new and novel medicines, so it gives them the ability to take complex genetic and radiographic information and be able to look at this algorithmically in real time to see if a patient and patients like that have or will respond to certain medicines. So overall, as I think about the approach that Pfizer is taking, patients are waiting and families are counting on us. We are setting very high and ambitious goals, and we are leveraging these digital technologies and AI-enabled solutions to bring treatments to patients even faster than we have in the past.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for sharing even just a glimpse into how Pfizer is using digital tools and AI to reshape oncology research. I mean, it's truly eye-opening just to think about what this could mean for the future of cancer care. And now I'll hand it back to my colleagues at the Washington Post.
Noetic is very focused on cancer, and in particular, the problem that we are targeting is which drugs work in which patients. Part of artificial intelligence is really a tool that enables us to bring all of this data together and begin to decode sort of the complexity of biology and the complexity of patient biology.
Hello. For those of you just joining us, I'm Paige Winfield Cunningham, a national health reporter here at the Post. I'm now pleased to be joined by Dr. Ron Alpha, co-founder and CEO of Noetic. Ron, welcome.
Hi, Paige. Great to be here.
So, Ron, starting out, can you describe in layman's terms for our viewers what Noetic does and also explain to us your Octo Foundation model?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So maybe I'll start very simply. So we are focusing on cancer therapeutics, but we are taking, somewhat of a different approach from other companies in the AI space. So really our core thesis is that getting a drug to work in patients is not necessarily a problem of molecular design. It's understanding the biology of the drug in the context of the cancer biology in the patient. And so what we are doing is training foundation models on tumor biology. So we're actually sourcing human tumors to train these AI systems, and allowing those models to understand tumor biology to help us understand which drugs are going to work in which patients. Now, our Octo virtual cell foundation model is just one example of this, where we've been able to bring in, thousands of human tumor samples, and train this model on different layers of biology. So you can think of this as, essentially giving the model everything from the level of the tissue to the cell to the genome, to understand sort of the underlying biology of these tumors. And then what the model is able to do is simulate the biology of individual cells. And so what we can do is ask scientific questions. So let's say we want to understand how an immune cell is going to function in the context of a particular patient's tumor. We can run that simulation, and that simulation is effectively an experiment that can help us ask scientific questions, that can help us determine biological insights that ultimately can lead to therapeutic hypotheses and drugs.
And can you tell us about what kinds of cancer you're focusing on right now?
Yeah, so we are really building our data set to span all of cancer. We started with lung cancer as an initial foray, so we've sourced really thousands of tumors. Beginning with lung cancer, now we've begun to move into colorectal cancer, uterine cancers, ovarian cancers, sarcomas. This year has been a really big push to sort of expand beyond our initial foray, and really we're aiming to train these models to go pan cancer.
I know that your Octo models train on what you describe as a spatial data set. Can you walk us through what more of what that is and then how you're using this massive amount of tumor data?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a lot of talk about, AI, and one of the questions is always, what are the underlying data that we're training these models on? So obviously for LLMs, we know the underlying data are all the text from the internet. When it comes to biology, then you really want to be able to identify, the best types of biological data if you want to build models that can truly begin to break ground on novel biology. So when it comes down to understanding sort of cells and tissues and like the interactions of those, we think it's important to really capture the full context of what's going on. So what we're capturing are, essentially patient samples that you could think of as analogous to pathology. So what would a doctor collect in the hospital to diagnose the disease? And so we start with that pathology layer. But then we generate more data beyond it. So we start with essentially that tissue layer, and then we look at the proteins. And the proteins allow us to know what different kinds of cells are present in that tissue. And then we go even deeper still to look at the RNA. And the RNA tells us everything about the gene expression for that particular tissue. And then finally, we look at the DNA, and that gets us to the mutations. So essentially, we're generating this full stack. But it's important to note that what we mean by spatial is that full stack of data is in the normal architecture of the tissue. It's not like we're grinding up the tissue and looking at individual cells separate from immune cells separate from cancer. We are maintaining the tissue architecture in processing it to generate all these data. And it turns out that that architecture becomes incredibly important for these models to be able to learn about fundamental biology and the interaction of different cell types with each other in the context of a tumor.
I think when a lot of people hear you describe this, they may still be envisioning, kind of adding AI tools to traditional drug discovery. How is what you're doing different from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So really what we are focused on is trying to understand this clinical problem. So, the last conversation I had with Colin, he referenced a really great number. So, 90% of drugs fail in the clinic. Why do those drugs fail in the clinic? Again, our thesis is that these drugs fail in the clinic not because we haven't designed these molecules properly or we haven't come up with really interesting targets and done a lot of preclinical science in the right way. We are excellent at pharmacology these days. We are excellent at running preclinical experiments. The hard problem is we don't understand how to connect basically preclinical work to understand which drugs are going to work in which patients when we get to the point of running a trial. So what we are trying to do is train these models directly on patient data, from actual patients in the clinic, and also patients in clinical trials, so that we can essentially solve the problem directly on the right types of data. So, we have a interesting partnership going on with a company called Agenus, where we're actually looking at their clinical trial samples and working with them to help identify biomarkers that could improve enrollment in their phase 3 trial. So really the goal of that work is to directly impact how they design the next clinical trial and increase the probability of success for that molecule. And for ourselves, internally, we are looking at a number of different molecules where we can, access that actual data and, use our models directly on that problem. So how do we increase the probability of success in the clinic for patients for these therapeutics?
To what degree do you think that you could increase the success of clinical trials with this? Because as you know, of course, the success rate is not high at all right now. So how hopeful are you there?
So we have seen this play out, historically with, other advances in oncology. So if you sort of take a historical perspective, initially we defined tumors based on their tissue of origin, and pathologists looked at the tissue and they looked at the cells and they classified them based on cellular architecture. The genomics revolution gave rise to a different understanding of tumor biology, where all of a sudden we can define tumors based on their genetic mutations. That enabled us to develop therapeutics focused specifically on those genetic mutations, and importantly, enroll trials where we can match those therapeutics with the patients with those mutations. And that dramatically changed outcomes for patients. All of a sudden, we had targeted therapy, precision therapeutics, where we can now see that for a given drug, that a set of patients with defined underlying biology have a much higher probability of success. So we see this as really the same type of problem. We're not focused today on what is the simple genetic mutation that we can identify that maybe is beyond what we've identified already, but really we see this as the next layer of complexity is goes beyond genetics, and really what we're trying to understand is the tumor biology as a whole, taking into account the genetics, the immune context, other tissue, other cell types in the tissues, and really begin to define these tumors in a much more complex way. That is sort of the reality of what biology is. And so again, I think that precedent is going to play out again as we begin to enter these new definitions. And our aim is really ultimately to move to a future where the models can better define tumor biology in the context of clinical trials.
You recently secured a $40 million Series A and announced a collaboration with Agenus to develop predictive biomarkers. How do these partnerships accelerate your path from AI models to actual therapies?
Yeah, we were really thrilled to bring on some incredible investors to support us. So with the $40 million Series A, really our goal was to begin to push from our initial data generation to expanding the data, pan-cancer, and training, much larger models. Today we are seeing that the models are performing essentially the inferences that we've been designing them to do. We can actually bring in clinical samples where there are outcomes, and we can use these models to understand underlying biology that's predictive of response for these patients, which is incredible. And the partnership with Agenus, as I'd mentioned, is really our first foray into leveraging these models on a real clinical problem in an active trial setting. So Agenus has generated an extraordinary amount of data for their lead program. The BOT-BAL program, in the context of multiple different tumor types. And they're incredibly excited to move these programs into phase 3. And so what we're doing together is asking, how can we use our models to better predict the sets of patients that are most likely to benefit in the phase 3 pivotal study format.
As you well know, the immunotherapy space is incredibly competitive. Major pharma companies investing a lot in this space. What gives your company, I know you were founded just 3 years ago, a competitive edge?
Yeah. I don't want to sound like a broken record. I think we are really focused on a different problem than a lot of companies in the space. I think this is sort of a moment in time where we are seeing that, the biotech ecosystem is in many ways flooded with a lot of different molecules, and molecular design has really gotten to the point where we can move from idea to molecule faster than we ever could in the history of biotech. But fundamentally, companies are still facing the same problem. When we get into the clinic, and especially in oncology, when we get into the clinic, how do we know which patients are going to respond? Even in cases where we have, let's say a molecule, there's a lot of excitement around antibody drug conjugates today. And these are molecules that have a well-defined target, and essentially it's an antibody attached to a chemotherapy agent. And the hope is really that we can sort of use this well-defined target to position these molecules in the clinic. But we're finding that even with a pretty well-defined target, it becomes still difficult to understand which patients are going to respond to these therapeutics. And so you increasingly need to consider more than just the individual target, but really the complexity of tumor biology to be able to enroll patients in trials to increase the probability of success. So we're generally seeing that this is a problem that faces everyone when they get to the clinic, especially big pharma. So it's I would say it's a good opportunity today for us to collaborate with a lot of different folks, and our hope is that we can add value to these programs and bring a lot of new medicines to patients much more quickly.
You have both an MD and a PhD from Stanford and could have taken many different paths. What drove you to start Noetic?
Yeah, well, fundamentally for me, I went into medicine because I was, really out of frustration. I wanted to make an impact for patients, and I felt like, um, all the fundamental science that we have accumulated, over the years was not moving fast enough. So, I went into medicine to really be able to solve this translational problem. And from there, I got really excited about startups. I joined an incredible company, Recursion Pharma, at early stage, and really had the privilege of working with some tremendous folks over there for 6 years. And at sort of the end of my tenure at Recursion, I started to feel that we have really made a lot of progress on integrating AI in biology, but there was this core problem that we hadn't solved, and that is what we refer to as the translation gap. Is how do we know which drugs are gonna work in which patients, and no one was really applying advanced AI methods to this problem. So I was incredibly excited to found Noetic at a moment in time where we were really founding the company at the moment where AI was at its peak of progress, and transformers had just come out, and we can really build models that it took us years to get to at the beginning of Recursion. So this was the right moment in time to take on a new problem, and I'm incredibly excited for the progress we've made in a very short amount of time.
So let's just zoom out for a minute, big picture. 5 to 10 years from now, what are the biggest ways that you see AI changing cancer care?
Yeah, so really the most futuristic version of the company that we're seeing is that, again, patients are going to get diagnosed in terms of their cancer by the AI model itself. And in that diagnosis, the model can tell you, can understand the fundamental biology of the cancer, and position the right therapeutic to be administered to that patient. And this shouldn't just be sort of a static process that happens once at the point of diagnosis of cancer. Cancers evolve as we treat patients with therapeutics. The cancer changes. The cancer responds to the therapy, and it sometimes cancers undergo mutations or evolve in certain ways that make them resistant to therapeutics. We should be able to continue to monitor the progress of the therapeutic along with the biology of the cancer using these models, and over time give patients the right set of drugs that are going to impact their survival and impact their cancer in beneficial ways. So really that's where we're headed, is the model is able to make the treatment decision based on fundamental complexity of biology and defining the tumor. We are not there yet. Today we're at a moment where we're bringing in these clinical samples, and we're asking, can we get the models to understand a very simple subset of this problem, in the context of one clinical trial, one therapeutic. Can we predict which patients are going to benefit over time as we accumulate these data across many different therapeutics, many different molecules? Then you start to build a system that has seen not just one cancer and one therapeutic, but many cancers, many therapeutics, and these models become very powerful and can start to make more complex treatment decisions.
The FDA and regulators are still developing frameworks for AI-driven drug discovery. What regulatory hurdles do you face, and how are you working with those agencies?
Yeah, we're actually seeing a lot of progress, more recently in terms of AI advances with the agency. So for us, today, we're not necessarily operating in a mode where we are going to look to necessarily bring AI-enabled diagnostics out of the gate to the clinic. We're really using the AI models to sort of back into sort of more traditional types of approaches that we can use for clinical trial enrollment. That said, we have seen this year some of the first approvals for AI diagnostics, and I think we're going to continue to see those over the years. Many different companies in the space are making a lot of progress in terms of having these conversations with the agency, and so I would say part of the challenge in terms of the regulatory framework is a lot of companies coming together to based on their own problems. To work with the agencies to create a framework that ultimately allows sort of the future to develop within the right regulatory framework.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask you about the Trump administration and its cancellation of hundreds of millions of dollars in cancer research grants this year. From where you sit, how is that going to affect progress in this country towards finding cancer cures?
Yeah, I mean, we never need less money for cancer. I mean, that's just not, it's not consistent. I was just at a panel, the other day at the Cancer Institute. One of the conversations I had with some of the physicians was around, essentially the full bed capacity of multiple hospitals at this Cancer Institute. And we are at a moment in time, I know we're making a lot of progress for patients. Patients are living longer with cancer, but we are still behind. There's still an immense amount of work to do, and there are a lot of patients that are suffering. And fundamental basic science research is still one of the most important things that's going to help us to bring new medicines to patients. So, I'm a huge advocate for basic research. I'm a huge advocate for fundamental scientific endeavors that are going to help us to understand biology. We are, at Noetic, we are, raising money from venture capital and building, immense data sets and hoping we can impact the problem in a big way ourselves. But I think, there's only so much that one company can do. We really need the whole community to be focused on this important problem.
Well, Ron, you've left us with a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paige.
And thanks to all of you for watching. For more of these important conversations, sign up for a Washington Post subscription and get a free trial by visiting washingtonpost.com/live. I'm Paige Winfield Cunningham. Thanks again.